What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the 11th album by country singer Jason Aldean. Basically, this project is called Highway Desperado, and it came out in late 2023, just really like a few weeks ago. So this is a request by the YouTuber, The Big Brain on Music. So I'm going to get to this one, and this is going to be kind of like a bonus video for the holiday special that I'm doing throughout This is going to be kind of a bonus for the holiday special that I'm doing throughout this year. So I would have to say, this is a pretty stellar album, definitely by Jason Aldean. I haven't listened to a ton of his albums, but I do at least know Night Train pretty well, and I do like that particular one. I want to get to his. Probably one of the next ones I'm going to review by Jason Aldean is his 2014 album, Old Boots, New Dirt, or something like that, or his 2010 album, My Kind of Party, one of those type 2 ones. But I would have to say about this particular project, it's a pretty stellar project here. Definitely like the feels of this one. It had a lot of malaise about this particular one. I'm just going to say right off the bat that if you're coming to this particular project hoping for like some hopping kind of tunes and some country bar kind of just get crunk, get crazy kind of meshes as far as that kind of goes, this album is really pretty laid back. I mean, this is a lot more malaise and not to say full blown chill, but just kind of more relaxed in like an R&R kind of sense. It just has a lot more simmering type feel, more so than a blazer type feel. There are 2 songs on this project that do have a little bit of jive, at least in like a country rock kind of feel, where this is more country, but it's just a lot more summer gazing, I would have to say. Autumn gazing type feels more so than like any sort of bops or something like that. So it's not really, this album is not really country club, country bar type tunes as far as having a ravenous kind of time, but it's not to say it's bad. This is going to get like a pretty rave score. This album's going to get a pretty rave score, I would have to say. And it's this interesting project here, but it does have a lot of distraction about it. There's just not a lot of like kind of jovial kind of bustle about this particular project. A lot of this is pretty malaise. I think this could kind of work as like a pretty good loud pack for a standard kind of country music fan who's blue collar or white collar or something like that, just kind of looking at the aspects of more kind of standard makeshift as far as that kind of goes. But in terms of like the turned up kind of vibes, it's not big on that, but it does have a lot of countryside kind of gazing and just kind of malaise type tunes for just like recreational kind of fare, but just in a more kind of you have to find the situations yourself more so than being brought to it. And this is kind of the concept. So it's just kind of just in a more rural sense that kind of has that concept. That's just something to know going in with that. Or I kind of felt like Night Train from 2012 had some bops on there and just that sort of stuff for just a little bit more jive. And there was also more countryside kind of gaze. I mean, there is some more on here, but it just feels like with this album, with the distract, I feel like there is countryside kind of gazing on this particular album, kind of similar to Night Train, but with the distracted kind of mood that Jason Aldean's kind of in, it just has less of, it has more of like a haphazard kind of feel where it's just kind of more kind of here and there, more so than just like the joviality from 2012 and possibly even 2010 or some of those type times from how that those sort of went. So this is kind of, I mean, I almost want to say this is a moody album, but it just kind of has some anguish about it. I just kind of feel like it's just kind of more of like a chip on its shoulder, and you can tell that by the lead single, which made a lot of noise on this album. Jason Aldean's first #1, Try That in a Small Town, is on this particular album. But as I listen to that song, I mean, that song has a particular chip on its shoulder. It's kind of, I mean, it fits the fold of like the Politico kind of fare that kind of dominated the summer of 2023 and that tough stuff. I would have to say it's not, I feel like Try That in a Small Town, it's kind of a mid-tempo blazer as far as that kind of goes, but it's just not the most peaking kind of song to kind of play in like a standard context. It's just kind of more of a statement making song to kind of have, but it did hit #1. It did a lot of damage. But I kind of look after it in terms of just, it's just more bruised than like the affability. I just question if you would hear this at like football games or basketball games or something like that, or those type fairs, or just out and about. You know, you're definitely probably would not be a common tune to kind of hear at a country bar or something like that. But that just kind of goes along with it. Like I said, this is a malaise and kind of anguished album, so it just kind of has a little bit more bruised type feel. So we'll go ahead and talk about the singles. Because this album is new, there's only 2 real singles released from it as of this point, but one of which is Try That in a Small Town, which came out in the spring of 2023, and the other one, which just came out just the other day, is Let Your Boys Be Country, which is the second most recent single. So I'd have to say I recommend one of those, but Let Your Boys Be Country is one of 3 songs on this album that I don't recommend. So that should tell you about the score that I'm going to give it. But we'll talk about Try That in a Small Town first. So Try That in a Small Town. Try That in a Small Town. It's kind of a malaise, kind of awareness country tune, I would have to say. It's got a summery feel about it, but it's kind of cagey, and it's just more of a statement kind of song. So this one has like Politico fare, just talking about the crimes that are kind of being committed throughout the nation, that type of stuff. I mean, I feel like it's an important song, and it does something to like the miscreantic type feels of how nature's kind of been in recent times. So I kind of look after it. It's not that much of a bop for like standard times as far as like this recreational type fare. It's not really an R&R or kickback type tune or something like that. Like I was saying, it doesn't really seem to have like a fit for like a football game. It's a little bit kind of like abrasive. It's not full. It has a mellow type feel. It's not full blown abrasive, but it just kind of is a little bit more like alert and just kind of more like ruffled more so than just the typical kind of fare that Jason Aldean usually has. It's just a little bit more like, hey, this is not, I don't fly with this, that type of stuff as far as that kind of goes in that sort of context. But it's just not really one for like most recreational fare. I mean, I think it's just kind of more of like a, for lack of a better word, just has more of like an abrasive kind of feel about it. But it did hit #1. It's a pretty big song, did a lot of damage. But I just look after it's not so much of a tune for like beer swilling and just kind of more kickback as far as those kind of go. But it did do the damage. So the second single is Let Your Boys Be Country. And this is another one. The second single is Let Your Boys Be Country. And this is the most recent one. This just came out a few days ago. And the thing about this particular song is Jason Aldean on this particular album just didn't have like the bustling kind of energy for like some regular kind of riveting type feels. Like that, this album is not really that riveting, I would have to say. It does have some good kind of affable energy just in the concept of just a standard country album, just with like some of that kind of typical charisma that country albums kind of have, but it doesn't have like anything that makes you want to stand up on couches and have like a jive of a time and dance a little bit. There's really no dance records on here to say that, and there's just not much of like much bustle, or there's bustle on this album, but there's not much jive in like a more recreational sense. Like I said, it's a pretty malaise project. The two kind of more country rock type tunes, most of this is just kind of when this, like Wikipedia says that this album is country rock, but I don't see the rock side of it as much. This is not very much like bustling kind of headbanging or just kind of, you know, motivated movement kind of oriented type country music. This is just kind of more like, I feel like this album has like the car tunes down, the bustle, the traverse type tunes, and some beer swilling, that type of stuff, and just a little bit of malaise kind of nightlife as far as that kind of goes, just in an anguish sense, but it doesn't really have much in like the joviality sense. That's just kind of, but the two songs like Tough Crowd and Let Your Boys Be Country, talk about Let Your Boys Be Country. Don't recommend this song just because it just was kind of, I mean, it has like the concept of just saying be country, be cool with it, that type of stuff. Just not, I mean, it's another kind of statement like song, kind of like try that in a small town, but I just didn't really see the affable productions on this particular one to kind of have much jive and bustle towards it. It just kind of felt factory made and just not quite as full blown like this was not one that really was much of a motivator. I mean, it's a statement song, and it did, like, I think it did the damage just to say that country should be around and that tough stuff. But I kind of look after it. It just didn't, was not very much of, it just didn't have like the standard electricity that I think probably could have been on here. But this album's still going to get a pretty rave score. So that, I mean, at least that particular single I didn't vibe with as much, but we'll see how like if there's going to be a third, fourth, and so on kind of single, what some of the ones he'll choose will kind of wind up being. But another song, just to go ahead, so to talk about the three songs I don't recommend on this album, which would just be Tough Crowd, Let Your Boys Be Country, and then I'm Over You, which the other two songs, Tough Crowd and I'm Over You, Tough Crowd was just kind of another up-tempo kind of one that really feels like a stadium, kind of wave your lighters in the sky type tune, just noticing like the crowds and the folks that are hard workers and just, you know, standard kind of tough crowd type individuals that just have a lot of chutzpah and that type of stuff, but didn't really do much in terms of like motivation as far as having like the electricity and the production to really get some of that jive kind of going. This was not as much of a throw. I mean, the lyrics were compounded enough to kind of have you have a good feel, but just the rest of the song work didn't really do much damage in terms of being like some jive. And then like I'm Over You is just kind of like a malaise kind of, then I'm Over You is just kind of a malaise relationship to him that just didn't have much real pep about it or too much of like a real affable kind of charm about it to really have. I mean, there's some ones on here that do have some bickering type feels that do a lot better, but this one just didn't really carry the energy quite well enough as far as that kind of went. So that was just kind of the thing. But talk about some of the songs on here. Talk about some of the songs I do recommend on here. Like Changing Bars is a pretty good one. This is like a drowsy kind of pub crawl swashedness, I would have to say. It's fun times, but it's kind of haphazard. This is kind of a jumbled day after hours pep, I would have to say. But the production work on this song is pretty good. It has the pep of just like a swash kind of feeling of just being at like a bar or a pub or something like that. Just kind of some place with the jukebox, those type places, country bars, some stuff like that. But I kind of look after it. The lyrics in the song kind of convey that it's just kind of more malaise and just kind of have the lyrics in the song kind of convey a little bit more of like kind of a dismayed type altitude about it that just kind of, I mean, some of these songs, there's definitely like the beer swilling songs on here and the hard liquor songs and that type of stuff. But Jason Aldean kind of has like a switch in mood and mindset as far as that kind of goes, where he's a little bit more in regret and remorse about kind of having a more kind of standard nightlife as far as that kind of goes. Just the maybe as if the, I mean, obviously he's on his 11th album, so all the country bar hopping and that type of stuff and just nightclub places that he's gone is probably starting to take a toll. But there's just some songs on here like Changing Bars. There's some songs on here like Changing Bars, From This Beer On, and Hungover in a Hotel, where he's just kind of growing wary of like some of the nightlife it kind of feels like. But that's kind of the concept about it. But these are just some, I mean, all of the songs that kind of have some degree of like outing kind of fair, have some degree of like distraction and kind of more like just disarray about them. So it's just something to know. But if you do like the production work and just the kind of feels overall of it, it does have the good melodies on here and just good ambience that it has. But it just when you listen more deeply to the lyrics, it's kind of where it's growing tiresome. So it's this kind of thing. But Highway Desperado is another hit. Highway Desperado, the title track, is another hit. This is an alternative metal light country groove. I would have to say it's a good on the go kind of evening makeshift blaze, I would have to say. So this is just kind of one, reminds you of something that like a rock artist would do on like an alternative metal type second or third single. This is a lot more makeshift, just for something for like an overcast day for like 4:30, 5:30 p.m., something like that. Just kind of a good blazer to kind of have for countryside, just kind of cruising, that type of stuff. Just kind of good makeshift, just city hopping, that type of stuff as far as that kind of goes. It's a good concept for that one. Another one that's kind of like that is Break Up, Breakdown. So Break Up, Breakdown is kind of an outward and traverse like malaise, I would have to say. It's got a good languid production about it with some solid bustle. So there are some ones, Jason Aldean talks about being like a highway desperado on here. There are a few ones like Break Up, Breakdown, Highway Desperado, and there's another one like Who's Rear View that kind of have some of those type ones. I would even say that like From This Beer On is kind of another one that kind of has that concept. So there are some ones kind of for some traverse, kind of being on the go and just kind of more kind of contemplative, kind of ruminating type altitude as far as traverse and that kind of happens. Those are some good ones for that. If you're a fan of old school Jason Aldean, a vintage one on here would be Knew You'd Come Around. This is a pretty good one. This is a vintage kind of Jason Aldean. This is a vintage kind of Jason Aldean, kind of countryside R&R kickback, I would have to say. It's a Have a Brew, and this is a Have a Brew and Summer Gaze kind of cut, I would have to say. And it's just an overall good summery kind of one to have. This is definitely one just for like more of like the gazing, just and the outback kind of feels as far as that kind of goes. Just a good one. It's a good one to kind of relax with some R&R type stuff. Just really kind of have like a brew, something like that. Just have some good relaxed kind of time. So I do like the feel of this one. Just like I do like the Night Train era Jason Aldean. So this is a good one as a reminder of that particular style and such. Kind of a good summary tune on this album is Rather Watch You. This is a simmering kind of countryside evening haze, I would have to say. It's a kickback ladies tune, definitely, and it's just a nice wind down kind of blazer. So this is another one that's kind of similar to Knew You'd Come Around, even though Knew You'd Come Around has a little bit more pep about it. But this is just kind of one for like a good this is a good 6:30 p.m. 7:30 p.m. kind of sunset type tune as far as that kind of goes. Just pink skies, orange skies, something like that. Great for like late August, September, some of those type feels as far as that kind of goes. Typical kind of country tune, but it works pretty well. It's just a good ladies tune to kind of have for that sort of stuff. This vintage, almost kind of like Night Train era Jason Aldean, I would have to say. It's just kind of a lazy one, I would suppose. But yeah, it's a nice one. Another kind of down tempo one that works pretty well, that kind of has some of that Night Train and just overall countryside kind of gazing about it, is Get Away From You. This is kind of a malaise, kind of day after hours ruminating kind of feel. This is kind of a relaxed, rural, spare activities tune, I would have to say, and it's just good for like an easy, lazy day. So this is just kind of one. Like some of these, like I feel like Knew You'd Come Around, Rather Watch You, and Get Away From You are all like a good package of songs to kind of have for. I feel like Knew You'd Come Around, Rather Watch You, and Get Away From You are all some lazy after hours for summer type feels as far as that kind of goes. Just great between the hours of like 4 and 7:30 p.m., something like that. Just some good kind of R&R type feels, just in like a real lazy kind of sense, and just, you know, just basic kind of summer activities, hanging out, tailgating, that type of stuff as far as that kind of goes. Maybe like a mellow cookout, something in that sort of sense. It's real kind of simmering type tunes, I would have to say. So those are some good ones. Pretty good highlight on this album is Hungover in a Hotel. This is like a woozy evening drear, I would have to say. It's out and about. It has some out and about kind of jive feels about it, but it's distracted, and it's a song that has the most outing on this particular album. So this is one where, like I was saying, a lot of this album kind of has Jason Aldean in kind of a more regretful sense, and just maybe growing tired of like nightlife and bar hopping and that type of stuff, and hotel hopping as far as that kind of goes. But this is just kind of one that just has a lot of dreary, just by the production. This is a really kind of dreary, kind of summerside kind of tune as far as that kind of happens, but it's just very drunken and just woozy overall. Just kind of that blear, just kind of that nightlife, but just the growing tiresome type feel of it. This is kind of the concept about it, but it is a nice one. If you're not paying attention as heavily to the lyrics, you just like the feel of it, and you like you like the composition of the song and just the out and about type feels about it. It has that, but it's just kind of like most of this album. It just kind of has that mood set of just kind of this fed up type feel, I would have to say. So it's just kind of the thing. Song with a little bit more pep on here is Who's Rear View, which has a little bit more engaging kind of a format about it, but still is kind of somewhat distracted. And like the lyrics tone, I would have to say it's a hazy, bickering gem for on the go. It's kind of a halfway hangout song like vintage Jason Aldean, but it's just a good on the go kind of contemplative haze, I would have to say. So this is just kind of one for just kind of being in the car, Travers type tune, just in a more kind of malaise type aspect of just being contemplative and just having some thoughts on your mind and just more ruminating, just in like a Travers sense, I'd have to say. So it's a good one to kind of have, just a good bickering song, another lady song to kind of have with Rather Watch You, but this one's just kind of a little bit more argumentative and that type of stuff as far as that kind of goes. But I do like the concept of that one. It's a good one. And then Whiskey Drink is kind of a summer gazing kind of evening haze, I would have to say. It's an easy liquor swilling tune, definitely, and it's just a good countryside tune, but it's kind of dismayed. So most of the, like I was saying, most of these liquor swilling tunes on here are kind of malaise and just kind of just fed up with like the same kind of mentality and stuff as far as that kind of goes, the same antics as far as that kind of happens. But I look after just the concept. Once again, this has a real good kind of gazing, and once again, this has like a good summer gazing type feel, just a good malaise kind of production work on here. It's just another vintage kind of Jason Aldean type tune, just in a more distracted sense. It's kind of the concept of just having some of these just in like the outing point where it's typical Jason Aldean as far as that kind of goes. Just some more kind of stuff to kind of have for like the typical kind of countryside type stuff as far as he kind of has. But just, more countryside, just out and about type fare, tailgating, that type of stuff, just having beers out in the countryside, that type of stuff. But it just kind of has the concept of this. I mean, it could almost be like a mild kind of bar hopping. I'd say this could almost be like a mild kind of bar hopping kind of tune, but it's just kind of a lot more just malaised about it. And just kind of has like a lazy kind of this sunset kind of feel about it. It's just kind of the concept. So a lot of these, I feel like songs like Whiskey Drink, From This Beer On, and Hungover in a Hotel, just some of those type ones just have like a lot more just standard malaise about it. But yeah, there's some songs on this album that just have a good summery type feel towards it, but it just doesn't have the pep of previous Jason Aldean albums. So it's just something to kind of know. But I would have to say, me basically recommending 11 out of 14 songs on this album, I'm going to go ahead and give this album like a 9.25 out of 10. I feel like this had some really good feels about it, and despite the fact that the lyrics were pretty anguished and just overall malaised and just kind of in a lot more dismayed kind of altitude, I would have to say there's just a lot more kind of statement making, kind of abrasive almost, and just kind of this ruffled kind of altitude about it. I do feel like the aspects of the composition of this album made for some really great music, and I would have to say that this is one of Jason Aldean's best, at least from what I've seen. I've only listened to 2 full-blown of his albums, but I'd have to say I like this one better than Night Train, despite the fact that Night Train had better energy, was more affable, and just had more kind of peppy kind of charm about it, and just had more dance tunes and just more Rick Rock kind of poppy kind of energy that just felt more commercial and just a lot more ambience about it. But this one's just a lot more just kind of brooding, contemplative, and just kind of has bigger chip on its shoulder. But it's interesting that this is the better album. So I just give it that aspect, just being able to say. But you just have to understand there's some beer swilling tunes, but it just, the mood of that is kind of tired of like the nightlife and things like that. It just has a lot more malaise about it. So it's just kind of the concept that you have to choose which album as far as that kind of goes, is which altitude to eat. Despite the fact that this is better, it just has more of a chip on its shoulder. It's just less recreational. So you have to kind of drown out the lyrics as far as that kind of goes, as far as that kind of happens. But I look after it like 9.25 out of 10. The social score I'm going to give a 7.75 because I'm interested to see what singles are going to chart after Let Your Boys Be Country, because like I was saying, I feel like the up-tempo songs from Jason Aldean on this album just didn't really hit home for me. Like Tough Crowd and Let Your Boys Be Country just didn't really do it. I just feel like there's just a lot of anguish on this particular project, so I feel like it just is not quite as peppy as previous Jason Aldean albums from what I'd have to say. I do feel like he probably could have stood to maybe possibly loosened up a bit more on this particular project. Not to say like I'm being disrespectful connotation, but just to say in that aspect, he could have had more jive just as far as I kind of went. But I just look after it 7.75 social. In terms of the future, like this album, Highway Desperado, just came out this month. So this is Jason Aldean's most recent, I have to say. But this, as of what I've seen, this is probably one of Jason Aldean's best albums. So yeah, definitely fuck with this. But just know what you're getting here.